Hello and welcome to this BCS Editor-in-chief for IT interview. Today I'm with Liz Benison, the UK General Manager for CSC, a leading global IT services company. Liz, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
I was wondering if you could start us off by just explaining what it is you do and what it is CSC does.
Okay, so I'm responsible for CSC's business in the UK. CSC globally is about 95,000 employees worldwide. We're about a $16 billion turnover company, and basically we provide IT and managed services for some of the world's leading organisations. So here in the UK, our clients range from the Royal Mail Group, BAE Systems. We do a lot of work for the public sector, a lot of work for the NHS, etc.
So what sort of challenges do you see facing CIOs at the moment?
So I think there's sort of two sets of challenges really that the CIOs that we're dealing with are facing at the moment. I think there's a whole set of challenges that are emanating from the business, and then there's a set of challenges that the IT services market is creating as well. So if I take the business challenges, consumerisation is a massive force for change at the moment. So people no longer will put up with the fact that when they get to work, the IT that they're working with is worse than what they have at home. So that's really driving both the behaviours of our employees, but also of the customers as well. So that's a massive pressure on CIOs to behave differently and react to that force. Increasingly, companies are struggling to find differentiation. And again, that's putting huge pressure as firms are seeing technology as a way of creating that differentiation. And again, that comes straight back at the CIO. The third one is agility. Whereas in the past people would expect that projects would take 2 years and cost X million quid. Now it's much more about we want it now. What can you do in 12 weeks? Short project cycles, rapid technology changes, and again that's driving the CIO to have to work in a fundamentally different way to what they were used to. And I guess the final one is a sort of macroeconomic thing. We've spent the last 2 or 3 years taking out cost out of businesses. All of a sudden everyone is talking about growth again, and where do you get revenue growth? And again, that's a real change in emphasis, and that drives some real pressures onto the CIO. I think from an IT services perspective though, there's also a set of challenges coming through. So the skills, the need for skills is ever prevalent, and again is changing. We now need we need millennials coming into the market who really understand social media. We still need some of the longer term skills, good project management, good service management, and so on. So that whole the drive for talent, the fight for talent in the market is as bad as it's ever been in the IT services space. I think increasingly CIOs are losing control as well. They've spent 20 years centralising budgets, pulling them back, having direct control over all that they see. I think now with IT being in everything that everyone does, again they're gradually losing control. So I think the challenge is, how much do you insist on exerting that control, versus how much do you let the business, to a degree, run with it and exert influence over that. I think the final one's a very personal challenge really, and I know I face this, but the CIOs I talk to do as well. We're just having to learn at a rate of knots that we've not really had to learn at, in the last decade or so. I could really read things every single night, just desperately trying to stay that one step ahead. And I've never known it. I mean, I've been in the industry 25 years now. I've never known that pace of needing to learn being as much as it is at the moment.
Do you think there's any particular reason for that?
I think that
is IT accelerating at that?
I think it really is. Yeah, I think it really is. I think the fact that 10 boys in a base room can produce an app now. It's just absolutely all pervasive now, and you're really just having to keep abreast of changes on so many different fronts. So I think it is absolutely accelerating, and deciding where you spend your time and what you get up to speed with is increasingly important.
Because I think a few years ago IT was kind of being seen as it's like the electricity. It was there and just sort of helped the business. Do you think now it's starting to go back to being, like you say, giving companies critical advantage over another?
I absolutely do. I mean, I'm a bit old-fashioned. I've always believed that. I've always believed that technology is a real enabler of business change and business differentiation. But I do think at the moment, I think we're in a really exciting time for IT again at the moment. I think this is a new, another inflection point in the market, and there are so many different ways in which you can use technology to really deliver business advantage at the moment. So if you take things like cloud, You know, before, if someone was planning you know, like a macro shift in the way that they go to market. So one of our customers is Specsavers. So there's some changes to the way that NHS allow companies like Specsavers to operate going through at the moment, which means that they were facing a situation where they just couldn't predict the demand that was going to be on their business. In the past, that would have been a nightmare because you'd be trying to plan your supply chain systems and everything to meet an unpredictable demand. You know, with the advent of cloud, they've almost got infinite capacity that they can access. So it's created a fundamentally different dynamic for businesses in the way that I think this is the one time I can remember where IT is not the constraint. Almost IT is ahead of the game at the moment. It's almost beyond where our imagination is. And that you never really hit a hard stop on the art of the possible from a technology side. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. I mean, are you in any way surprised that you talk about social media and bringing in people who are sort of au fait with it? Are you in any way surprised at the way that in the last, say, 5 years, it's kind of jumped onto business and businesses had to suddenly deal with it?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely overwhelming. You know, for you know, for a generation of people who didn't grow up with that, it's absolutely overwhelming. And you know, certainly one of the things that we're doing at CSC is we're using our graduate intake to really help us think some of this thing through. You know, both internally how we use social media, but also then thinking about how we take social media to our customers as a competitive play.
It's kind of turned a lot of businesses upside down, because you would kind of, like you said, the graduates would come in and they'd be trained up in maybe a graduate scheme or whatever. But now it's almost like the graduates are coming in and they're doing the educating of the established staff.
Absolutely, and we're actually calling it reverse mentoring at the moment. So we're actually getting, you know, we have some of our more established colleagues to mentor, you know, graduates in commercial skills and client-facing skills and all of that. But we're getting them to reverse mentor on some of the technology skills as well. And certainly I'm using them to critique, you know, some of my comms strategy and things like that, because, you know, I'm missing a massive audience in the way I communicate.
Yeah,
so,
because you kind of assume the ways that you've done before would work. Still. But
Yeah. And we do. I mean, I use social media like my mum uses text. You know, my mum still texts. You know, dear Elizabeth, how are you today? And I use social media in the way that my mum uses text. And we've got to realise that there's something fundamentally different happening out there, really. And we're having some great conversations with our clients around this stuff as well, because so we're working with one of the leading banks in the UK at the moment, and they were unaware of a lot of the things that were happening in the social media world that was affecting their brand perception and so on. And we've been able to really turn that on its head for them and give them a view of some of that. How they then choose to respond is up to them, but at least now they've got access to that.
Yeah, and are they? Well, I guess the horses, of course, they're all different. They respond in different ways, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, you know, what we've been able to show them is that other competitors are using this as a real, you know, competitive landscape. You know, there's a whole different world out there where these competitors are competing in different arenas that they didn't even realise were, you know, were the fronts for the battle.
Of course. Now, the other thing that I've been reading about lately that's changing is apparently the way the government is approaching larger IT projects. There's the history of failed IT government projects.
And some really good ones too.
And some really good ones that we don't tend to hear about, the ones that have succeeded doing. But they're changing the way. One thing I read is maybe going towards more of a startup, more of an agile mentality. Now, you touched on agility earlier. Is this something you're seeing and it's having an effect on?
It absolutely is. So we do a large proportion of our revenue comes from public sector, and we've been involved in some very large critical programs inside the public sector over the course of the last 10-15 years. We are definitely seeing a change. So we are seeing the government really open up to buying in commercial ways and buying the sorts of things that our commercial clients buy as well. So for example, we were one of the very early participants in the G Cloud, and in fact we were at a meeting yesterday with the Cabinet Office discussing the take-up of services being procured through the G Cloud. So the G Cloud is a catalogue for services, and once you're accredited to be on that catalogue, a government department can procure through that catalogue without going through a standard procurement process. So it cuts down the lead time for procurement dramatically, but it means that they're buying, you know, standard products off the shelf, and these are, you know, again, it's predominantly cloud. It's things like email in the cloud. It's obviously storage in the cloud. Things like that. So we're definitely starting to see, and the government have a measure around, you know, what level of business they want to be doing through G-Cloud by a certain date. So they're really putting pressure on the likes of us to make sure that our G-Cloud offerings are fit for purpose and that we're selling them. You know, we're actually going to market through the G-Cloud and marketing our services. So definitely seeing that. Definitely seeing, you know, whereas government programs in the past were, you know, hundreds of millions, a couple of years, you know, 200 people at least on the ground, we're now seeing the demand for much shorter, sharper turnarounds and a more agile way to developing product. And a much bigger willingness to take standard product or you know, almost unheard of a few years ago, take something that one department's doing really well and move that across other departments. Now we'd like to see it happening quicker, and that was our perspective yesterday, but we're certainly seeing, and I think it's sort of driven by two things really. One is I think the technology coming of age and being sufficiently dependable, but I think it's also, you know, the austerity agenda is driving that buying behaviour as well.
I mean, you talked about sort of 10 people in the basement creating stuff. Can you see a day when we get
absolutely, in terms of public sector, absolutely, and again, you know, a big theme of their agenda with the likes of CSC is how can we be the wrapper for some of those smaller and medium enterprises to provide their innovative services to government. So we're talking at the moment to a small company up in Newcastle. A really interesting idea. People with great IT skills who don't want to work down south can sort of understand that. Different cost model because they're working up there, and they've got some great agile ideas. But they don't have the financial robustness or the commercial maturity to deal with government directly. So we're talking to them about how they plug into some of our offerings, and therefore we become their route to market into government. And that model is extremely supported by, you know, by the Cabinet Office and public sector in the wider.
Almost like an app store for the government.
Exactly, yeah. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, fantastic. And do you think with this sort of greater understanding of things like app stores and social media, that people, sort of the Joe public in general, are more receptive to these sort of ideas and changing the way the government works in terms of software because they think, oh well, you know, I'm familiar with this.
I think so. I mean, again, I think there's I mean, it's not necessarily a generational issue, but I think there is you know, there's an audience out there who are extremely receptive to that. You know, they do their banking on their phone, so they're quite happy to do their tax return on their phone. But, you know, I think the government face that, you know, the problem I face is that you've got lots of different audiences that you're trying to address, and not all will move at the same pace. So I think there's some really good initiatives out there at the moment to get to some of these populations who are not as digitally active as others. You know, to really bring them on board. The interesting thing, I saw some work that the government's sponsoring at the moment a few weeks ago around, it's not just an age gap thing, there's also a large proportion of 16 to 24-year-olds who are not active in the digital space as well at the moment. So how do we make sure that nobody leaves school without, you know, the ability to log onto a website, create an email, all that sort of thing? I think that's really fascinating.
Now, obviously the